What if one of the biggest lies you've ever believed about yourself is that you're simply not that smart? I've been thinking about that question for a long time, because I've met people who never considered themselves intelligent. They second-guessed every decision, overanalyzed every conversation, and felt out of place in a world that seemed to reward quick answers over deep thinking. Yet the more I explored psychology and cognitive science, the more I realized something surprising. Many of the behaviors we quietly judge as flaws may not be flaws at all. They may simply reflect a mind that's processing the world in a different way. Welcome back to Psychology Unlocked. I'm glad you're here. Before we dive in, if you enjoy exploring the hidden patterns behind human behavior and the fascinating science of the mind, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support encourages me to keep creating thoughtful videos like this, and I truly appreciate having you on this journey. Now, let me be clear about something. This isn't a test that can measure your IQ, and it's certainly not a label that determines your worth. Human intelligence is far too complex to fit into a simple checklist, but I do believe that some everyday habits deserve a second look. I become genuinely curious about why certain behaviors keep appearing in conversations about highly intelligent people, not because they prove someone is a genius, but because they reveal something deeper about how the brain processes information, solves problems, and experiences the world. So today, I'd like to explore 10 subtle behaviors with you. As we go through them together, don't ask yourself, "Am I intelligent enough?" Instead, ask a different question. What if I've been misunderstanding the way my own mind works all along? Sometimes the most remarkable things about us are the very things we've spent years trying to hide, and the final sign may completely change the way you see yourself. So let's begin with a few habits that are often misunderstood, but may deserve far more curiosity than criticism. The first one is talking to yourself. For years, I assumed it was simply a strange habit. Then I came across research suggesting that speaking our thoughts out loud can help the brain organize information, strengthen memory, and work through complex problems more efficiently. That completely changed the way I looked at it. Instead of seeing it as a sign that someone is distracted or unusual, I started wondering if it was actually a form of thinking made visible. Another habit that caught my attention is overthinking. Most of us see it as something to eliminate as quickly as possible. And yes, excessive worrying can become unhealthy. But I've learned that not every overthinker is trapped by fear. Sometimes they're driven by curiosity. They replay conversations, explore different outcomes, and question their own conclusions because their minds naturally examine ideas from multiple angles. Psychology often describes this as metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. I've also noticed that many people who become bored with repetitive routines aren't necessarily lazy or unmotivated. Some simply crave novelty. Their minds seem to come alive when they're challenged with something unfamiliar or intellectually demanding. And perhaps the most surprising habit is self-doubt. The more someone truly learns, the more they realize how much remains unknown. To me, that quiet humility isn't always a weakness. Sometimes it's one of the clearest signs that a person has never stopped growing. But the more I reflected on these patterns, the more I realized that intelligence isn't only revealed by how we think, it also shows up in how our brains respond to the world around us. One habit I've always found fascinating is staying up late. I'm not suggesting that losing sleep is a sign of brilliance, because good sleep is essential for both physical and mental health. But I've noticed that some people feel their minds become unusually active once the noise of the day fades away. When distractions disappear, ideas seem to connect more naturally. I've read research suggesting that some individuals who prefer later hours also perform well on certain measures of reasoning and creativity. Whether that's true for everyone isn't the point. What interests me is how different minds seem to flourish under different conditions. Another behavior that's easy to misunderstand is being unusually sensitive to noise. Maybe you've been distracted by a ticking clock, a buzzing light, or someone quietly tapping a pen, while everyone else seems completely unaffected. I've often wondered if that isn't simply annoyance, but evidence that the brain is constantly taking in more information than it knows how to ignore. Of course, that heightened awareness can feel overwhelming at times, but it can also help someone notice subtle patterns that others miss. Then there's procrastination, a habit almost everyone feels guilty about. What surprised me is learning that not all procrastination comes from avoiding responsibility. Sometimes people delay starting because their minds are still organizing ideas beneath the surface. When the deadline finally arrives, they shift into remarkable focus and produce work that reflects hours of unconscious processing rather than last-minute panic. And then there's memory. Some people forget where they left their keys this morning, yet can recall a random conversation from 10 years ago, almost word for word. I've always found that contrast fascinating. Perhaps intelligence isn't about remembering everything equally. Perhaps it's about what your mind quietly decides is worth holding on to. And after looking at how the mind thinks, focuses, and remembers, I think there's one dimension of intelligence that deserves far more attention than it usually receives. For a long time, I believed intelligence was mostly about logic. The more I learned, the more that assumption began to fall apart. Some of the most thoughtful people I've met weren't emotionally distant at all. In fact, they seemed to feel everything more deeply. They noticed when someone was struggling, even before a word was spoken. They could sense subtle changes in a conversation that most people overlooked. At first, I wondered whether that level of sensitivity made life harder. Now I see it differently. Perhaps a mind that recognizes complex patterns is also more likely to recognize the emotional patterns hidden within people. Empathy isn't simply about being kind. It often requires careful observation, perspective-taking, and the ability to understand experiences beyond your own. Those are demanding mental skills in their own right. But if there's one habit that keeps appearing whenever I read about curious and intellectually engaged people, it's this: they never stop learning. Not because they believe they know too little, but because every answer leads to another question. I've come to think that genuine intelligence isn't measured by how much information someone can collect. It's reflected in their willingness to remain curious, even when they already know enough to impress everyone else. Maybe that's why the people I admire the most are rarely the ones claiming to have all the answers. They're the ones who keep reading, asking better questions, changing their minds when new evidence appears, and treating learning as a lifelong conversation rather than a destination. To me, that quiet curiosity may be the most remarkable sign of intelligence of all. And perhaps that's the most important thought I hope you take away from today's conversation. The more I've explored this topic, the less I believe intelligence can be reduced to grades, test scores, or how quickly someone finds the right answer. What seems to matter just as much is curiosity, self-awareness, adaptability, and the willingness to keep learning throughout life. If you recognized yourself in some of these behaviors, don't rush to label yourself as a genius or as someone who isn't. Instead, let them be an invitation to become more curious about the remarkable way your own mind works. After all, understanding yourself may be one of the smartest things you ever choose to do. I'd genuinely love to know which of these signs resonated with you the most, so share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy exploring psychology, human behavior, and the fascinating science behind the way we think, consider subscribing and joining me for the next conversation. There's always another question worth asking, and I'd be glad to explore it with you. As we come to the end of this journey, I hope one idea stays with you. Intelligence isn't always loud, obvious, or easy to measure. Sometimes it appears in quiet reflection, endless curiosity, deep empathy, or the courage to question your own assumptions. Many of the habits we've explored today may simply remind us that every mind works differently, and that's something to appreciate rather than hide. Instead of comparing yourself to someone else's strengths, spend more time understanding your own. The more you learn about how your mind naturally thinks, learns, and grows, the better equipped you'll be to develop your potential with confidence and purpose. The greatest lesson isn't to convince yourself that you have a high IQ. It's to stop defining your worth by a single number or by other people's expectations. Stay curious. Keep asking thoughtful questions. Challenge your own beliefs when new evidence appears, and never lose the desire to learn. Those habits will serve you far better than chasing labels ever could. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which of the 10 signs did you relate to the most, and why? Please share your answer in the comments below so we can learn from each other's experiences and perspectives. If you enjoyed this video and want to explore more fascinating insights into psychology, human behavior, and the science of the mind, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support truly motivates me to keep creating thoughtful videos like this, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.